obviously all three of you made that decision to return back to either Canada or the US, and you all went through different pathways when it came to returning back and making that decision whether you choose to work as a doctor in Canada, US. If each of you could kind of explain how that process was for you, whether it be, I know each of you had a little bit something different. So with that process, kind of with the testing you had to completed, as well as that transition for residency matching, and what is that looking like so far through your process? I know for a couple of you, and then for Dr. Rana, obviously now practicing, what did that kind of look like, the whole residency matching, as well as completing the test once finishing school in Australia? We'll start with Dr. Harsh Desai.
Hey, I think just a disclaimer, when we started transitioning from Australia to Canada, it was a COVID time. So things were very different for us because we had restrictions about when we could get outside the country to do testing and things. So that sort of affected how our plans sort of shaped. So that being said, yeah, I think I wasn't able to sort of pursue my goal of going back to Canada at that time because I couldn't do one of the NACOSCI that we had to do prior to applying for the match for Canada process. So I had to sort of choose an alternate part of the United States. Again, I could not rotate through the United States at that time because if you want to if you want to do residency in the United States, you need clinical rotations down here, which is now it's easier since COVID is sort of not a big factor at this time. So I think based on that, I had to sort of, I was able to apply to limited programs down in the United States, and I was thankfully able to match to a program currently in South Carolina. But it wasn't an easy challenge, not be able to do clinical rotations down here, not able to apply to Canada. Things have also changed now, but at that time, US matching happened before the Canadian matching. So if you did match to Canada, US, you cannot match to Canada. But I heard that the process has sort of changed now. So I think it's probably a little bit more easier for people going, if you choose to go back to Canada, the process is easier.
Awesome. And I see a couple of students asking similar questions. So just a follow-up for you, Dr. Harsh, because you completed the US MLE. Is that correct?
Yeah. You have to complete that, two of them, step 1 and step 2. Yeah, at that time, there was a transition because of COVID that they didn't have the clinical skills ones. And I think it's still not it's not brought back in. So that was also a great change they made.
And so what was that process for you? Just like another follow-up, a process for you taking the US MLE. Now, a lot of students wonder, if they do want to go to the US, what does that look like as a test? Is it very difficult? Was the process for you completing it quite challenging? Is it difficult to match later on after the US MLE? That's what students are also wondering.
Yeah, so definitely different because people in Australia are not looking to come to US, so they're not studying for the US MLE. Most of the curriculum is sort of aligned with what the US MLE testing requires you to start a study, but there's some sessions where Australian med school do not emphasize as much because their focus is not US MLE, like microbiology and so forth, which you have to take the extra initiative to sort of study. But UQ recognizes that people want to come back to US and Canada, so they have courses that sort of help you prepare for the testing as well. So that was when I was taking med school. There were a specific course designed for people who want to come here, so they would have tutoring and things like that for the testing, along with giving you access to the UWorld and so forth. And the interesting thing about UQ is that there's also people that come from the United States, and then they have an exchange program with the New Orleans, Louisiana. So there's a lot of US students there. So they are all focused on the US MLE and matching back to the United States. So it's a good sort of gather with them and sort of group studies and things to motivate you to study for those testing. But you do have to take initiative to study by yourself.
Awesome. Perfect, Dr. Harsh. Thank you so much. We'll move to Dr. Kevin Yang. So yeah, same, that transition of what it was like going through pathways, returning back to the United States, and your kind of goal overall and what that looked like for you.
Sure. I'll kind of start with just a little bit of an overview from what went on through my head when I was applying for everything. So the timeline wise, the first thing that you're going to go through is going to be Australian internship, and then followed by kind of the US and then the Canadian For the Canadian, especially for family medicine, and that's what I'll talk about. It's only 2 years of residency training, so kind of most advantageous. However, you usually have to do a return of service, so you end up going somewhere far for about 2 years. Whereas in the US, the family medicine training is 3 years, but you don't have to do a return of service. And for Ontario, I believe you can just transfer license. It's just that transferring time, that processing time that takes a while. In Australia, so somebody was asking if the GP training would be equivalent. Yes, it's equivalent in the US, in Canada, and Australia. All three of them will lead you to the same path. But the Australia one might take probably the longest out of the three, because I believe the internship is now 2 years. And then once you start basic physician training, transitioning to the GP training, total, you might need about 4 to 5 years. I guess the benefit is that you might be able to get a visa that leads to Australian citizenship, but that's not my forte, so I won't go too much into that. US one also allows you opportunities to go through fellowship if that's something you're interested in. Certainly a lot more chances for the US residents compared to the Canadian ones. And the transition is pretty seamless. For me, the process is harder, and it kind of touched on a little bit, us, the IMG versus the Australians. The Australians have a guaranteed internship spot the moment they get into med school. So they're kind of a little bit more relaxed than you are. Whereas IMGs, you really have to prepare and kind of know what you're doing every step. Step one, you have to have that done around second year. You have to study a lot while the other people are partying. Third year, you're starting to prep for your step two. And then for the MCCQE, you can kind of take consecutively with the step two. So that part is a little bit easy. I did not take the NAC OSCE, so I can't comment on that. And the step two CK, which is similar to NAC OSCE, is canceled. So that's kind of helpful for you. And then you start your interview process in the fourth year. Most of them is online now, so that's very helpful. It saved a lot of money. And then before the match day, which is in around April, you'll have a gap there. So most of us apply for internship. The Australians government doesn't like that, but at the beginning of this Austrac, like Adrian was saying, a lot of Canadian applicants end up staying in Australia. And to me, that sounds kind of ridiculous at the beginning, but I kind of really got to see the attraction there, because Australia is actually a very nice place. If you don't have families or whoever who's stuck in Canada waiting for you, it's actually a fantastic place. The pay is fantastic. The residency process isn't too tough. You're expected to work about 40 hours a week, and everything else is overtime. The environment is nice. The food is nice. So a lot of my friends did end up staying. And even if you do take the long pathway, eventually you can go back to Canada if that's your choice.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Kevin Yang. And finally, for the one who is now practicing in Canada, Dr. Sahil Rana, and kind of his process of what that was like going from Australia through the Canadian pathway, and then what it's like to now practice here in Canada.
So I would say, so I did my 4 years, and I finished in 2018. So I did an intern year and then a junior house officer year, completed both years. The medical school in Australia, it's quite relaxed compared to, I think, Canadian medical school. So you see that when I came back as a resident, we had third year clerks from from Canadian medical schools that did the same job that we were basically doing as I was getting paid for it, and they were in hospital doing 24-hour shifts. The Australian system is much more relaxed. I never did an overnight shift as a medical student. I never worked past probably like 10 p.m. as a medical student in Australia. So it's quite relaxed. And then intern year, junior house officer year, they train you very gradually in Australia. So that's why it's relaxed, 40-hour weeks. You're not doing overtime. And that's why when you come back to Canada, if you haven't worked or you haven't pushed yourself in medical school, it can be a rough transition, because as a resident in Canada, you're expected to do a lot more very quickly. So that's why if you do go to Australia, you have to study a lot harder than the Australians if you want to come back to Canada, because again, they're not working to the same degree, because as I said, passing medical school year to year is relatively easy. Coming back to Canada, I did 2 exams, the QE1 and the NAC OSCE. So I would do the QE1 in your 4th year. if you plan on doing internship. If you don't, then do the QE1 in your 3rd year, NAC OSCE in your 4th year. You have to make travel arrangements to come back to Canada for the NAC OSCE, like it was already stated, so that can be difficult. I did both of my exams in my intern year because I knew I was going to work the following year. Pay is very good in Australia, 70 some grand starting, and then paid overtime, so you can make close to 100,000 per year if you stay there, which you can pay back your loan pretty quick. Residency, difficult to match in Canada, but again, as stated, if you do plan on coming back, you have a very good chance of matching. In my year, I had 80 Canadians that went to UQ. In the first 2 girls did not do internship. They matched right away into, I think, emergency and gynae. And then the following intern year, a further 5 people came, and the next year I came. So whoever wanted to come back did come back. And then residency, you have to match. I matched in Saskatoon, so I do have a 2-year return of service there, which I'm doing in chunks. Yeah, that's about it.